Our next guest at the India Today Conclave in Mumbai is an institution builder par excellence, India's most renowned banker. Corporates latch on to every word of his, and he's the man the government turns to when there is a sign of stress in the financial system. He's recently dropped a bombshell saying he wants to step away ahead of time from his executive functions, and he hasn't spoken much in the public since. So we're absolutely delighted to be joined at the India Today Mumbai Conclave by the founder and director of Kotak Mahindra Bank, Uday Kotak. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul, and delighted to be here at the India Today Conclave. I think one of the most prestigious and outstanding events which India Today manages to do year after year.
We are delighted to have you here, sir. Shorn of all political and economic rhetoric, bankers are often the best people to get a strong financial sense of the state of the Indian economy. We're seeing some macro green shoots in terms of India being amongst the fastest growing global economies. Private investment, though, is refusing to kick off. We were here a couple of years ago on the back of corporate taxes coming down, and you'd expressed hope that this would create a virtuous investment cycle. We're still waiting for that cycle to kickstart. And we're seeing household savings, which had been one of the big strength areas of the Indian economy, now declining, as is the case in many countries. So could you start by giving us a temperature reading of your understanding of the current growth prospects and the state of the Indian economy?
I think in the last 3 years, in the post-COVID period, India has come out remarkably better than what I would have thought about at the beginning of COVID, which is March 20. And if you look at 3 years later, we look like in a much better place than what we would have thought. Therefore, India has battered and navigated through the COVID period extremely well. Simultaneously, if you look at the Russia-Ukraine situation, India has once again positioned itself so beautifully from a geopolitical point of view, and actually Indian economics getting lower energy for India, at the same time standing up in the world to say India will think for its own interests versus anything else. These two are one of the most outstanding developments from an economic point of view in a fast-changing geopolitical landscape. And kudos to all of us in this country, and particularly to all the policymakers and the government for really bringing us and navigating us through what was clearly 3 years of turbulence. And therefore, I do believe from a temperature check point of view, India is in a good place. However, the world is not in such a good place. And the reason I say it is because the US has lived off the world's money for a long time, because most of the countries around the world keep their surpluses with the US. And therefore, US gets all the money being the reserve currency. And at the same time, US deficits are very high, and you've seen from zero interest rates now in US have moved up more than 500 basis points and don't seem to be stopping. And the world's reserve currency, if it pays 5.5% on its money overnight, then the rest of the world has to adjust on the interest rate. So that is one part. Second is China. I frankly cannot figure out what is really happening inside China. And the latest Evergrande situation, which is a large real estate developer in China, has gone bust. They did not take quick action. It was a problem 2 years ago, let it fester for a long time. And the Chinese economy is not in a shape which I think it should be for getting the world out of trouble. And then, of course, you have the Russia, all the other issues. Therefore, the world, both economically and geopolitically, is not in a good place. Therefore, India is in a good place, but we are in an interdependent world.
So the banking system is more robust than it has been. According to the RBI's Financial Stability Report for June, gross non-performing assets are continuing a downward trend at about 3.9%. That's a decadal low. Deposits growth, which had come down in 21, 22, 23, 23, is standing at 11.8%. Personal loans are growing at 22.2%. So the banks are doing well. Private investment, though, hasn't kicked off in the way that you would have liked, the government would have liked, and every Indian citizen would like. Why do you think that's the case?
You're completely right. Indian banks are in phenomenally good shape. And this is a great time to be from the point of view of Indian banking. However, a lot of the Indian banking lending, if you look at last decade or so, has moved away from corporate lending to much more retail lending. There were a lot more consumer loans and funding, consumer financing has become the core of most of banking. On the other hand, corporate lending businesses are not growing at the same time. And there could be 2 or 3 reasons. One, I wonder where are the animal instincts of all the corporates? What is it that is holding corporates from going ahead and expanding at speed and scale?
You explain the answer, that we can see.
No, I think my view is a lot of the global uncertainty is something which may be weighing on corporates' minds. The geopolitics is uncertain. India's competitiveness is something which we must look at. We have to ask the tough question that despite China going through all its trouble, why does India have a net trade deficit with China, close to $100 billion a year? Why is it that we in India cannot manufacture and find it cheaper to import from China? $100 billion a year is what India net pays to China in terms of net imports. And that is the question which we need to ask to our corporates, that for all our strong fundamentals, why is it that corporate India is not able to compete with a China?
Do you see that change, or do you think we're caught in a situation where because of the way things are, that is unlikely to change? Because everybody's been waiting for a virtuous investment cycle, which hasn't started. And if it is to start, and if you were advising Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman and Prime Minister Modi, what would be your bullet points?
I think first, we are doing the right thing by increasing government spending, because government spending has to happen. On the back of it, we need to create an environment where corporate India is ready to take big calls on investing into the future. And here, again, I'm saying something which is close to my heart. There is a significant concentration of new investments happening by only a few groups. What India needs to see is many flowers bloom. What we are seeing today is many people are not going ahead and taking the animal instincts call, as a result of which we are seeing significant consolidation and concentration.
That could happen for 2 reasons, Mr. Kotak. One is that the animal instincts of those promoters and industrial groups is stronger than the others, and they're taking punts which the others don't want to, or policy is skewed to favor some over the others.
So my sense is, from a policy point of view, and I'm not saying the policy is skewed, my sense is policy must encourage many flowers to bloom.
And that's not happening right now, because many flowers aren't blooming.
Let me give you a few examples. Look at the telecom sector. If we met here 5 years ago, there were 13 players. Now, at the best, we are 2.5. Let us look at the airline industry. You've consolidated effectively to 2.25. Let's look at the steel sector. 2 big guys and a lot of small guys. So massive consolidation has happened and continues to happen. And with that, the risk of concentration of business power as distinct from wealth. I'm talking about business power in a few hands, which in the short run can give us results. But long run, you want many businesses to flourish in India.
What would you do differently? Because post-pandemic, in any case, we've seen at the top of the pyramid more concentration of wealth globally. Plus, creating this national champions, for example, in countries like South Korea, did help their growth. But you don't want so much concentration of wealth in a few industrial houses. What would you do differently?
I think first, most important, free and fair markets, backed by policy, which actually allows a competitive marketplace. I would certainly want to see a stronger role of the Competition Commission to ensure that there is fair play in the marketplace. You do not want such concentration in a few hands, which I think long term, as an Indian, I would love to see many more Indians succeed. It's good to see a few big successes, but how do we multiply them exponentially?
You know, I started the session by saying that people latch on to every word of what Uday Kotak says, and I think in the last few minutes you've demonstrated that, because you speak your mind, you speak it fearlessly, and that is fantastic. In the last 21 years, the RBI has given 4 full-fledged licenses for banks. Do you think, in the manner in which the Indian economy is projected to grow, say 10 trillion by the next 10 years, by 2033, are we building enough of a financial sector infrastructure to be able to power the kind of growth the Indian economy is anticipating?
No, I must first compliment the RBI for a phenomenal job in the last 3 years. The way RBI has navigated India through these difficult times, we must compliment the regulator, particularly in the areas of monetary policy and macroeconomic stability. The RBI has also played a very significant role in the health of the Indian banking sector. So we must credit the RBI for dramatically and profoundly managing the Indian financial system to very stable shores. The question which we have to ask for the future, and this is not about the present or the past, is what are we doing for our aspiration? And this is where I think there is an opportunity for Indian practitioners, Indian bankers, Indian policymakers, all of them, to manage risks but get a little bolder. And what do we need to do to change the rules of the game? Yes, we want to minimize accidents on the road. The way to do it is to have better traffic signals, better supervision, better regulation. It is undoubtedly necessary. But along with that, we must encourage lot more cars on the road and lot more roads to be built for a future. And therefore, there are areas where we can do much better for our future.
But you don't want the traffic policeman to be telling the driver constantly on how to drive. Do you think there's too much interference and over-regulation on aspects of operations on the part of the RBI in the affairs of banks?
No, I think our RBI has an important role to do. Keep in mind, banks are much more leveraged institutions than most average companies. Banks can leverage 10, 12 times its equity. So there is a need for proper oversight. But how do you manage risk whereby you say, I want to minimize accidents, but we cannot get to a situation where there will be no accidents?
You know, I for one, and I'm itching to ask this question to Mr. Kotak, can't understand why the Reserve Bank of India must pick from the list of potential successors that you've given, Shanti Ikambaram and KVS Manian, or somebody else coming out. Shouldn't it really be the decision of the Kotak Bank and you as founder to pick who you think is most capable of getting the job done, rather than having the RBI weigh in?
So first of all, the regulation is clear on this now and for a long time in the past. That's how it has been. The board of the bank has to recommend 2 names in order of priority to the regulator. Thereafter, the regulator will make its call and give an approval to 1 name. That's the process which has been there in India for a while and continues to be that. Therefore, as a regulated bank, Kotak Mahindra Bank has followed the regulation as required. Now, whether regulation is right or wrong, it is not for me representing a regulated entity to be speaking about. Rahul, you are a much freer man, but as me, I am regulated and I respect regulation.
Okay, he's like a good batsman, just let that ball pass, which is perfectly sensible. Given also the fact that you will now have more free time and you're such a bundle of energy and ideas, I wonder what you intend to do.
I hope, Rahul, you call me more on your channel.
So if you ask us, we'll call you as frequently as is possible. You're very difficult to get hold of and you very rarely come, which is why we're so delighted to have you here. But when Uday Kotak is not looking at balance sheets and financial statements, what is he doing?
So let me first say, once I've been 38 years doing this, and there comes a time to take a view and sit back. That there is many more things in life which matter. And for a founder, it's normally very difficult to say, I give up. But once you take the call that you want to do things in life in addition to your responsibility as a board governance member, which I continue to be on Kotak Mahindra Bank board and a significant shareholder, I think life has a lot more opportunity. And I'm basically saying that I'm going back to have a plain white canvas so that I can paint the future the way I feel like.
What do you want to paint? Like you must have some, like as an artist, what's your vision? What do you want to paint on your life's canvas?
Artist paints and must paint freely, because that's the true opportunity. Therefore, I do not call myself an artist, but I do feel a plain canvas is a very big opportunity at a turning point of India's future. I think India is at a cusp of a major, major change and opportunity. India's time is now over the next 5 to 10 years. And at that point of time, to say I have a plain canvas to do whatever I want is a sense of relief and release from a day-to-day operational responsibility.
Speaking of succession, Mr. Kotak, do you see your son Jay one day run your bank?
Today's times, first of all, kids have a mind of their own. He decided to come back and work in the bank like any other professional. And it's up to him. If he performs, he may have an opportunity. It's merit, professional merit, and it is for the bank and its board to decide. I am a believer that there are two business models in corporate India. And I'm meandering a bit, but I want to talk about these two models. There is one model which I call as the Raja Praja model, where the Raja decides what is right for the company and goes ahead and does it. The Praja has to accept what the Raja does. And the Raja has tremendous power, therefore can create disproportionate wealth for the company. But the Raja will decide how much Praja will get. That is one model. The second model is what I call as the trusteeship model, where you say that you are a trustee for all the stakeholders and create a fair business model for all the stakeholders. The trusteeship model obviously is not as influential in terms of getting opportunity as the Raja Praja model, but it is far more fair to all stakeholders. My instinct always has been in favor of the trusteeship model, because I think that is truly what builds a country, a nation, and a company.
You know, you've been a institution builder, you've been a wealth creator for your team, and you virtually treated your senior leadership as part owners. And I think that's one of the big reasons behind the success of the Kotak Bank. You spoke of consolidation, and you spoke of a few big industrial groups having a disproportionate sway. Speaking of which, Jio is coming into financial services. And when they came into the telecom sector, we saw how 13 batsmen became 2.5, 2.25. How do you see that play out in the context of the financial sector?
So I just want to clarify, Rahul. I have great respect for what a Reliance or any of these big houses have really built. I think they've really created world-class institutions of excellence. I mean, everything they've done, they've created it world-class and of quality. Therefore, I'm fully supportive of what they've done in building of India. But I believe that in addition to what they've done, India needs a lot more and lot broader. That was the point which I wanted to clarify. And specifically with reference to Jio's entry into financial services, I think that's a very good thing, because you really want people in any sector to always be on the edge. Moment you get complacent, things don't move. And being on the edge is critical for any company's future. And I believe in the line, only the paranoid survive. And if you're paranoid, you will survive. If you're not, you don't need to be in the business.
So I want to ask you two questions. If you are advising Mukesh Bhai and KV Kamath on what they should do, what would you tell them? Where do you see the space in the sector? Where could they come in? What could they do which is disruptive, which then puts the existing players on their toes?
Rahul, I take advice from Mukesh and KVK. I don't give it to them.
Achha, theek hai. And he charges a lot for his advice, so pocket mein nahi milegi. That's the other part. If you are now strategizing from within, and you've got this behemoth coming in, they'll buy some domestic funds, they've already tied up internationally. How are you preparing to deal with the challenge? We don't know what form and shape it will ultimately take, but winter is coming, there's a challenge coming. So how are you preparing to deal with it?
I will learn from the India Today model in media. It has survived all the competition and all the players come in. And I'm delighted to be here.
Artificial intelligence has been a big area of conversation. So two aspects. One, as a consumer, how are you using AI within Kotak to make my life easier? B, because the banking sector is as big an employer as it is, how much disruption do you see artificial intelligence cause on jobs in the banking sector?
I think AI is a game changer, and it's going to make it possible for us to be able to provide significantly superior outcomes to customers and people in general. It can change society. It can change how we do our work, how do we look at our future. And if you look at the last 50 years, the amount of change we have seen is just enormous. I remember 50 years ago, we were barely seeing the beginnings of television in India. From there to where we are, to where AI will take us. It is another leapfrog from the current level of the digital age. It's going to think for us, and what has happened in chess, where the computer is superior than the human, is something which we need to watch out for. And as humans, we need to figure out how we are going to be relevant with competition from a machine. And we need to hone our skills and get better, because otherwise the machine will get the better of us.
So, what's your advice to young bankers at this time, given that the machine can throw up better analysis than you can possibly do through the human brain? How should the next generation of bankers be planning to lead when machines are smarter than men?
You know, there are two parts of the brain. There's the left brain and the right brain. On the left brain, the machine will get better of humans. The right brain, which is the creative brain, is where the humans will always score over the machine. And therefore, my advice to all younger generation is think out of the box, what is not apparent, and take those bold calls, which the computer doing 010101 will never get there. Therefore, AI is a left brain competitor. It's much less a right brain competitor. Therefore, use your right brain a lot more for the future.
The other part of the question was on job losses as a result of AI, which is in banking and elsewhere, especially for your tasks which have a monotonous element to them, you may not need those many bankers. How do you assess the prospects of job losses, not just in your bank in general? I'm talking about a more macro question.
I think more generally, from the point of view of jobs, we're going to see new industries really take off. I think one of the biggest growth areas for the future is going to be the leisure industry. It is the gaming industry, it's the sports industry. You're going to see what we think about as traditional business and industry is undergoing a fundamental change. However, the world will deal with a question whether there are enough jobs for human beings versus the number of activities which the machine will do. And from a long-term political point of view, the question which we will have to address over the next 5, 10, 15 years is the concept of universal basic income. It is something which is very unaffordable for most countries, but it is an issue which the politicians of the future will have to deal with for its people as the base level of universal income, which needs to be provided by the state for all individuals, whether they have a job or do not have a job.
Many top economists like Abhijit Banerjee at MIT, Arvind Subramaniam, Raghuram Rajan, they've all been advocating for a UBI. Do you believe India can afford a UBI? Should India definitely find a way of affording a UBI? What would be a typical level of UBI that you think is relevant? And do you think this is where the conversation should be heading to?
I think we will most probably move in this direction if the number of jobs are taken over more and more by machines. I have suggested in the context of sustainability, one of the finest laws India has compared to any other country in the world is the CSR law. A 2% CSR by every company paying out of its profits every year for doing its social responsibility. I have suggested that what India is doing, why can't every company in the world have a rule where instead of giving it to the state, companies as good citizens give 2% of their profits for social responsibility. If we can create this kind where there will be, and if we see a world where there will be fewer companies as big winners with large profit pools, the time has come for these companies to give some direct allocation of some of their profits annually for things which are changing the planet, whether it's climate change or whether it's moving in a direction for a minimum income for all.
In fact, Mr. Kotak was part of the B20 deliberations where the committee that you headed actually came up with a recommendation along those lines.
Yes.
To try and generate up to $4 trillion of climate financing.
Yeah.
So we're running out of time. Before I end, you mentioned that the traffic policeman, which is the RBI, needs to regulate less.
I did not say that.
That's what I understood. Could you suggest a few particular pain points where you'd like the RBI to back off and let bankers do their thing?
No, I think RBI has done a lot of changes. I find that RBI very flexible and open to suggestions. Therefore, if I take the liberty of giving suggestions, one area which I would think India needs to be ready for is, say, acquisition finance. How can Indian companies get acquisition finance from Indian banks? Today, if a company wants to buy another company in India, you're dependent on foreign banking for sources outside India. The current limitation of lending against shares, even for acquisition, is a limit which was fixed in 1992 of rupees 20 lakhs per individual.
That's ridiculous.
So we need to be looking at, if India really wants to unleash its animal spirits, including for smaller and medium-sized businesses and even some larger corporates, access to finance is going to be one of the most important differentiators for building an India of the future. And we need to make that easily available with guardrails for risk. Risk management is the core of any leverage finance business. But along with that, we need to make it available for Indian entrepreneurs to get to scale.
America had the Lehman Brothers moment. India had IL&FS, where you stepped in and tried to play a role in ensuring that the contagion didn't spread. Where do you think China went wrong on Evergrande? And you mentioned that things aren't emerging with very clear data sets suggesting how the Chinese economy is doing. So how bad do you think things are, and where could China's economy go from here?
From late 70s to 2020, for a 40-year period, China was focused on pragmatism in economics. Politically, they were clear that they wanted a command economy, but pragmatic on economics. I think China is moving away from pragmatism on economics to ideology, which is working against Chinese entrepreneurship. I think it's a very important opportunity for India to grab it and grow at 9 to 10%, not 6% as we are.
No, you can't say that without me asking, what do we need to do to go from 6 to 9? And the big political question, and I'll ask you about whether there is inevitability to India's growth story, like the Congress and the likes of Chidambaram and Jairam Ramesh have us believe, or do you believe it is a lot dependent on the nature of government that gets elected in 2024 and the kind of governance? So is India's growth story inevitable, or is it dependent largely on politics?
Never take anything for granted. We have to work for it. Therefore, to say growth is our birthright, I don't agree. We will have to work for it, have the right policies, right execution. And only then can we take growth to the next level. We may have a base level of growth which is 4 or 5%, but if you want to get to 9 to 10%, it goes back to Gita. You have to do your Purusharth. And you have to think.
What is the 3% that could be that Purusharth? Like, what could governments do to go from 6 to 9? Because I interviewed Ruchir Sharma in New York recently, and he said 6 is the new 9. Like, you can't expect 9, 10, because that's a different world where the world is more open, there's more global trade. Now countries are getting protectionist, there are new trade barriers coming up. So this is a different world.
Ruchir is talking from a Western world point of view, where growth is 2 to 3%. I respect Ruchir a lot. But if you want to change India's destiny, and China has shown it. I'm not saying we want an autocratic rule by any stretch, but India can do it in its own ways. Over the next 10 or 20 years, go for 9 to 10% growth, unleash Indian entrepreneurship, have great guardrails for fair competition and encourage free and fair markets with enterprise to transform India not just to the third largest economy, but to a much higher per capita income.
That's true. That is very, very important. I could go on, but we're also out of time. So I want to thank you for joining us and for being so... So two things. One, he could give Dr. Jaishankar a run for his money when it comes to diplomacy. He said what he said, but he said it in such a guarded and careful way that nobody can object to anything that he said. And I think that's quite commendable. So apart from being a fantastic banker, you're a terrific diplomat, and we saw that. And I really look forward to seeing what you paint on that canvas of yours. You have a fantastic new canvas, your life ahead. And thank you so much, Mr. Kotak, for joining us at the India Today Mumbai Conclave. Thank you, sir.